Maya Johnson, an African American from a modest neighborhood, was the result of years of hard work, perseverance, and resilience. She had grown up in a predominantly black area where injustice and inequality were commonplace. From a young age, she had witnessed the daily struggles of her community against a system that was often biased. Inspired by these experiences, she made justice her mission. Maya set herself an ambitious goal: to become a judge, not only to succeed for herself, but also for those who, like her, came from humble beginnings. After years of study and hard work, she became one of the youngest judges in the state. Known for her integrity, discipline, and commitment to justice, she was a respected figure both in the courtroom and in her community. On a chilly autumn morning, Maya was preparing for an important day. She was heading to the courthouse in her red Tesla, a car she had bought as a symbol of her success. As she drove through the narrow, tree-lined streets of an upscale neighborhood, her thoughts were already focused on one of the day's cases. This highly publicized case involved serious police misconduct. A young black man had been brutally detained by officers, and the incident had made headlines. Maya knew that this case would not be easy, as it touched on complex issues: abuse of power, racial prejudice, and the role of justice in a divided society. Maya was driving peacefully, her thoughts still on the day's case, when suddenly, a police car appeared in her rearview mirror with its lights flashing. Confused, she glanced at her speedometer. She was driving within the speed limit and had not broken any traffic laws. Her brow furrowed, but she decided to pull over to the side of the road. It must be a routine stop, or so she hoped. Officer Mark Reynolds stepped out of his vehicle. A white officer with 7 years of experience in law enforcement, Reynolds was known for his strict adherence to rules. As he approached Maya's red Tesla, he adjusted his utility belt, his hand casually resting on his holster. Inside the car, Maya took a deep breath, trying to stay calm despite her irritation at being stopped for no apparent reason. It was a situation she had faced before, being stopped for suspicious reasons, with no justification other than the color of her skin. But, as always, she knew it was better not to show her emotions. She rolled down the window and offered a polite smile to the officer. "License and registration," Reynolds demanded in an authoritative voice, without any greeting. Without saying a word, Maya rummaged through the glove compartment, retrieved the documents, and handed them over calmly. As he examined them, his eyes shifted from the papers to Maya and then to the car. His face showed visible distrust. "Is this your car?" he asked, his voice laden with suspicion. "Yes, it is my car," Maya replied in a neutral tone, her face expressionless. She knew exactly what was happening. It wasn't the first time someone questioned her legitimacy in owning an expensive car. But she remained stoic. She had learned to navigate these tense moments with calm and dignity, even if, deep inside, anger was rising. Maya stared at the officer without blinking, refusing to give in to the irritation building within her. Reynolds nodded, seemingly dissatisfied, and then straightened up. He glanced quickly at his colleague still in the patrol car, as if to check something. Reynolds, still suspicious, stared at Maya for a moment longer. Then, in a harsh voice, he said, "You're sure you didn't steal this car? These papers don't convince me. A black woman like you can't afford a car like this." Maya's heart tightened, but she remained outwardly calm. She had heard such hurtful comments before, but never in such a tense situation. Despite the blatant racist insult, she knew she couldn't give in to anger. She took a deep breath, the cold autumn air entering through the open window. "Get out of the vehicle immediately. I need to search it," Reynolds ordered, his voice betraying a mixture of arrogance and suspicion. Maya hesitated for a moment. She knew she wasn't required to get out without valid reason, but before she could react, Reynolds pressed his walkie-talkie and called for backup. The other officer, a younger man, quickly exited the patrol car and approached. Maya watched the scene unfold before her as if it were frozen in time, a situation that could have turned very dangerous. She knew that in similar circumstances, many people had been mistreated, even hurt. But she was a judge, and her composure was her best weapon. "What's going on, Mark?" the second officer asked, casting a questioning glance at Maya before turning to his colleague. "This woman claims it's her car," Reynolds said sarcastically. "I'm going to search the vehicle." "She's probably lying." Maya remained still, her hand firmly on the steering wheel. She didn't want to exit the car, aware that she had the right to refuse a search without a valid reason. But before she could protest further, Reynolds made a sharp motion, grabbing the door handle. He opened it forcefully. "Get out," he ordered, his voice hardening. Maya looked at him, her face still impassive, though her heart was beating faster. She knew that resisting physically would only escalate the situation, so she stayed calm, trying to manage the surge of adrenaline coursing through her. But before she could react further, Reynolds grabbed her arm and pulled her out of the vehicle with a force that surprised her. The second officer, visibly uncomfortable but following the orders of his more experienced colleague, stepped forward to help restrain Maya against the car. They placed her against the vehicle, her hands on the hood, while Reynolds prepared to search the car's interior. Despite the humiliation of the situation, Maya remained silent. She knew she could tell them who she was, a respected state judge, a public figure. That could have ended this abuse of power immediately. But she chose not to say anything. She wanted to see how far their contempt and violence would go, simply because they believed they were dealing with a black woman without power or influence. Reynolds searched the car frantically, turning over every object, every compartment. Maya stood upright, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, clenching her jaw to prevent her irritation from showing. Her inner calm, so precious in the courtroom, was being tested, but she knew that self-control was her only weapon in this moment. "Nothing here," Reynolds muttered, frustrated, as he slammed the door shut. He turned toward Maya, still pressed against the car. "Where are you hiding the evidence, huh? You stole this car and I'm going to prove it," he said with toxic confidence. Maya took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. She knew speaking now would be pointless. Every word she said would only fuel their hostility. But inside, she was consumed with quiet rage. Maya, still maintaining her composure, knew she couldn't let the situation escalate without acting. She discreetly took out her phone, opened her contacts app, and called the state prosecutor, a colleague she worked with regularly. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. She spoke in a low voice, outlining the situation directly. Reynolds, however, immediately noticed she was making a call. Frustrated by her apparent calmness, he took a step toward her, his face hardening further. "What are you doing?" "Calling another thief, just like you," he spat venomously. "I warn you, when he gets here, he'll be detained too." The second officer, still visibly uneasy, tried to calm the situation. "Mark, maybe we should just wait and see," he said, but Reynolds ignored him, continuing to glare at Maya with disdain. Maya stayed silent, continuing to speak on the phone with the prosecutor, calmly explaining what was happening. With every passing second, the tension in the air grew. She knew that the situation could quickly spiral out of control if the prosecutor didn't arrive soon. A few minutes later, a government vehicle screeched to a stop a few meters away. The prosecutor, a tall man with a commanding presence, hurried out of the car, his expression grim. He quickly approached the officers, Reynolds and his partner, who were still standing beside Maya. "What's going on here?" he asked firmly, positioning himself immediately between Maya and the officers. Reynolds, seeing the man approach, furrowed his brow, but before he could speak, the prosecutor flashed his badge. "I'm the prosecutor for this state," he said coldly. "And I can assure you, you've just made a serious mistake." The prosecutor then turned his gaze toward Maya, nodding to her before turning back to the officers. "Do you know who you've arrested and mistreated for no reason?" he asked, his voice full of authority. "This woman is Maya Johnson, a state judge. And you've abused your power in the worst way." Reynolds, shocked, took a step back. His colleague, meanwhile, looked bewildered, his face betraying a sudden realization of the gravity of the situation. The prosecutor then turned to Maya, his expression softening. "Are you okay, Maya?" he asked with concern. Maya, still standing straight and stoic, nodded. She didn't want to reveal the pain of the humiliation she had just endured. Even though she had stayed silent, the wound was deep, still very much present. Reynolds, now pale, seemed to understand he had crossed a line. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The prosecutor, still looking grim, took a moment to assess the two officers. He slowly approached Reynolds and then his partner, making sure to note their badge numbers and the patrol car's license plate. The officers, now silent, seemed unsure of what to do next. "You made a monumental mistake today," the prosecutor said in an icy voice. "I want you to remember this. You'll be hearing about it. Not only did you arrest a judge for no valid reason, but you mistreated and humiliated her. Do you think you're above the law?" He paused, his sharp gaze fixing on Reynolds, then the other officer, who no longer dared to move. "I'll make sure this case goes all the way to the top. I suggest you think carefully about what you write in your reports, because I'm going to pursue you for abuse of power, racial profiling, and obstruction of justice," he threatened, his voice as sharp as a razor. The second officer, increasingly uncomfortable, tried to stammer something. "Mr. Prosecutor, this wasn't supposed to happen like this," he said awkwardly. "Oh, I know that well," the prosecutor replied, glaring at him. "But you let this happen. You chose to follow orders instead of doing what was right. You're just as guilty." Reynolds remained silent, staring at the ground, aware that his career had likely just taken a catastrophic turn. "When I'm done with you two, you'll see if justice is as lenient as you seem to believe," the prosecutor concluded. He then turned to Maya with a protective expression. "I'll personally handle this case, Maya," he said calmly, but with firm determination. "I'm sorry you had to go through this." Maya, who had remained calm up until that point, gave a slight nod of acknowledgement, but she still hadn't spoken a word. She knew the prosecutor would keep his word, but what had just happened echoed deeply within her, touching on years of fighting against a system that saw her first as a black woman, not as a judge. She got into her car, her heart heavy, while the prosecutor lingered a moment longer, staring at the two officers with an accusing gaze before walking away. This story highlights the importance of accountability, courage, and the need to reform a system that must not tolerate racism at any level. It's a reminder to us all that, no matter our status, the fight for equality and justice must continue. Maya's determination embodies the hope for a more just world for future generations.